Hey guys, welcome to Science Owl Station. Today we're stepping into a place where time does not rush, where nothing blinks or flashes for attention, and where the loudest sound is often a barely audible breath between two ticking seconds. Imagine this moment with me. It's late at night in a small Swiss valley. Outside, snow settles quietly on dark wooden rooftops. Inside an old stone building, a single lamp glows warm and low. Under that light, a watchmaker sits alone at a long bench. No phone, no music, just magnifying lenses, polished steel, and hands that move slowly, almost ceremonially. This is where luxury watches truly live. Not in storefronts, not on wrists, but here, in stillness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'd love for you to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Somewhere in the world, someone else is listening too, and the clocks are all quietly disagreeing with one another. Now, let's slow everything down. Tonight isn't about fast facts or dramatic reveals. It's about sleepy facts. The kind of details that don't shout. The kind that gently unfold when you stop trying to measure time, and instead, let time measure you. A luxury watch, at its core, is a contradiction. It exists to tell time, yet everything about it resists speed. In a world obsessed with efficiency, luxury watches are stubbornly inefficient. They take longer to make than necessary. They contain parts you'll never see. They rely on techniques that could have been replaced decades ago, but weren't, on purpose. And that's our first quiet truth of the night. Luxury watches are not designed for people in a hurry. They are designed for patience. Before quartz crystals and digital displays, time was something you listened to. You felt it through vibrations, through balance wheels breathing in and out, through gears whispering against one another. Early watchmakers didn't chase precision the way we understand it today. They chased harmony. The goal wasn't speed. It was consistency. A steady pulse that could survive days, seasons, and human error. Even now, when atomic clocks can measure time to absurd precision, mechanical luxury watches continue to exist, not because they are better at telling time, but because they tell a story time cannot erase. Each watch is a tiny mechanical ecosystem. Springs store energy like compressed memories. Gears translate force the way language translates thought. The escapement, the heart of the system, releases energy in carefully rationed moments, reminding the entire machine that restraint is more important than power. And here's a sleepy fact most people never consider. A mechanical watch doesn't measure time. It negotiates with it. Every second is an agreement between friction and balance, between pressure and release, between what wants to move forward and what must hold back. This is why silence matters so much in watchmaking. In high-end ateliers, sound is treated almost like contamination. Conversations are hushed. Movements are deliberate. Because when tolerances are measured in microns, thinner than a human hair, even a rushed breath can be a mistake. And mistakes in luxury watchmaking are not easily undone. Many parts are finished by hand after machines have done their work. That means a slip of pressure, a moment of impatience, can ruin hours or days of labor. Which is why watchmakers learn early that speed is the enemy of beauty. This leads us to another gentle realization. Luxury watches are not built to impress you at first glance. They are built to reward attention over time. The more you learn, the quieter they become. The more you understand what's inside, the less you feel the need to show it to anyone else. That's why many collectors talk about watches the way others talk about books they reread, or songs they return to late at night. The value isn't in novelty, it's in familiarity. And strangely enough, this intimacy begins long before the watch ever exists. Designing a luxury watch often starts years before a single component is made. Not with marketing goals, but with questions. How will this watch breathe? How will it age? What should it feel like to wind it at dawn, half awake? Some designs are revised endlessly, only to return to their original form. Others are abandoned entirely, not because they are flawed, but because they don't feel right. In watchmaking, intuition matters as much as calculation. And this is where sleepy facts become truly comforting. There is no rush in this world. A watch that takes 5 years to develop is not considered slow. It's considered careful. A prototype that never reaches production isn't a failure. It's simply a thought that wasn't ready to become time. As we move deeper into this series, we'll explore how materials are chosen, how hands and machines collaborate, how sounds are tuned, and how some details exist only for the person who will never see them again once the case is closed. But tonight, all you need to know is this. Behind every luxury watch is a deliberate refusal to hurry. And maybe that's why they feel so calming to think about. They remind us, quietly, that not everything valuable needs to be fast, loud, or constantly improving. Some things just need to keep breathing, 1 second at a time. Wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while, soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. Time behaves differently when you stop chasing it. As you settle into this next stretch of the night, imagine the same watchmaker from before. The lamp is still on. The snow outside hasn't changed much. What has changed is his pace. Or rather, your awareness of it. Luxury watches are often described as tools, instruments, precision devices. But that language never quite fits. A tool implies urgency, a task, a reason to be efficient. Luxury watches resist all of that. They exist in a strange space between usefulness and contemplation. Yes, they tell time, but so does your phone, your laptop, the glowing numbers on a microwave across the room. None of those objects ask anything from you. They simply deliver information and move on. A mechanical luxury watch asks for attention. It wants to be wound. It wants to be worn. It wants to be listened to. And that's where another sleepy fact begins to surface. People don't buy luxury watches because they need to know the time. They buy them because they want to feel time. When you wind a mechanical watch, you are physically storing energy inside it. Not metaphorically. Literally. Your fingers compress a spring that will slowly unwind over the next day or two, releasing energy in controlled, rhythmic portions. This simple act creates an invisible bond. You gave the watch life. And now it will spend the next hours quietly spending it. There's something deeply human about that exchange. For most of history, time was not something you checked. It was something you sensed. The position of the sun, the length of shadows, the way hunger returned at familiar intervals. Mechanical clocks and watches didn't replace this intuition, they refined it. Early watchmakers weren't trying to dominate time. They were trying to cooperate with it. And even now, centuries later, the philosophy remains. Luxury watches are designed around limitations. Springs can only store so much energy. Gears can only transfer force so efficiently. Friction can never be fully eliminated. Instead of fighting these constraints, watchmaking embraces them. This acceptance is what gives mechanical watches their soul. Every watch runs slightly differently. Temperature changes affect metal. Gravity alters balance. Even the way you move your arm throughout the day subtly influences performance. No two watches age the same way. No two develop identical rhythms. In a quiet sense, luxury watches are alive. Not biologically, but behaviorally. They respond to their environment. They adapt. They remember. And that memory accumulates. Collectors often talk about how a watch feels settled after years of use. The movement becomes smoother. The sound softens. The interaction grows familiar, like a well-worn book that opens naturally to certain pages. This brings us to something rarely discussed outside watchmaking circles. Luxury watches are not designed to be perfect. They are designed to be enduring. Perfection is static. Endurance requires flexibility. That's why mechanical watches are allowed tolerances that seem shocking by modern digital standards. A few seconds gained or lost per day isn't a flaw, it's a reminder that this object lives in the same imperfect world you do. And oddly enough, that imperfection is soothing. When everything around us updates constantly, apps refreshing, notifications arriving, systems optimizing, there's comfort in something that simply keeps going, quietly, without improvement or interruption. A luxury watch doesn't ask to be upgraded. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't compete. It waits. This patience is reflected not just in how watches function, but in how they are valued. A new luxury watch is rarely at its most desirable state. Time must pass. Surfaces must soften. Edges must dull just enough. The object must absorb the life of its wearer before it feels complete. Which is why many of the most cherished watches are not new at all. They're inherited, passed down, worn through decades of ordinary days. In that sense, a luxury watch becomes a vessel. Not just of hours and minutes, but of moments, of habits, of quiet mornings and long evenings. And perhaps that's the deepest sleepy fact of all. Luxury watches don't measure how much time you have. They quietly record how you spend it. This idea influences every design decision. The weight of the case, the resistance of the crown, the smoothness of the winding action. These details aren't accidental. They're meant to slow you down just enough to notice what you're doing. Even checking the time becomes a pause, a breath, a reminder that the moment you're in is already moving on. As we continue tonight, we'll drift further back, into history, into unexpected origins, into materials shaped by forces far older than any human calendar. But before we go there, let this thought settle gently. Luxury watches are not about controlling time. They're about making peace with it. And in a world that rarely stops moving, that quiet acceptance might be the most luxurious thing of all. If we move slowly backward now, past glowing storefronts, past modern wrists and leather straps, we arrive at a moment that often surprises people who love watches. The first wristwatches were not made for explorers, not for soldiers, not for pilots or engineers. They were made for women. This is one of those sleepy facts that feels almost unreal when you first hear it. In the early days of portable timekeeping, serious men carried pocket watches. Heavy, practical, hidden away in waistcoats. Wearing a watch on the wrist was considered decorative, even frivolous. Something ornamental. An ornament, at the time, belonged to women. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, small watches were adapted into bracelets and bangles, designed to complement dresses rather than measure precision. Accuracy mattered less than elegance. These early wristwatches were intimate objects, worn close to the skin, felt rather than consulted. Time, back then, was personal. One of the earliest documented wristwatches was commissioned for a queen. It wasn't meant to endure battle or harsh weather. It was meant to exist gracefully, quietly marking moments in royal life, ceremonies, conversations, pauses between obligations. And for decades after that, wristwatches remained in that space. Jewelry with a heartbeat. Men continued to favor pocket watches not because they were better, but because they aligned with ideas of masculinity and seriousness. A watch hidden away, checked discreetly, suggested control. A watch worn openly on the wrist suggested display. This division lingered far longer than most people realize. Even when wristwatches became more common, they were often marketed as novelties. Convenient, yes, but not essential. Proper timekeeping, the thinking went, still lived in the pocket. And then, slowly, circumstances changed. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but quietly, like everything else in watchmaking. As daily life became more mobile, the need to access time without stopping grew. Coordinating schedules, transportation, work shifts, all required faster glances, quicker confirmations. Pocket watches, elegant as they were, began to feel distant. The wrist offered immediacy. At first, adaptations were crude. Pocket watch movements were simply strapped onto leather bands. Lugs were soldered on as an afterthought. Nothing about these early conversions was graceful, but they worked. And that practicality began to outweigh tradition. What's fascinating is how long it took for perception to catch up with function. Even as men began wearing wristwatches more regularly, many still felt the need to justify it. Advertisements emphasized durability, utility, strength. The language shifted deliberately, distancing wristwatches from their decorative origins. Beauty was downplayed. Precision was emphasized. Yet, deep inside the movements, little had changed. The watches still relied on the same principles. Springs breathing in tension. Gears translating force. Escapements rationing energy like careful accountants of motion. The soul of the watch remained gentle even when the marketing became bold. This transition left subtle fingerprints on watch design that persist today. Case sizes grew. Dials became more legible. Hands became bolder. But beneath those visual cues, the core philosophy stayed intact. Time was still being negotiated, not conquered. And there's something quietly poetic about that. Objects originally created as personal adornments eventually became symbols of professionalism, discipline, and status, without ever losing their intimate nature. A watch may signal authority to others, but to its wearer, it remains a private conversation with time. Another sleepy detail often overlooked is how this origin influenced proportions. Early wristwatches were small, delicate, designed to sit lightly on the wrist. Even today, many of the most balanced and timeless designs echo those early dimensions. Not because of nostalgia, but because comfort and harmony were discovered early on. The wrist, after all, hasn't changed. It still prefers balance over bulk, presence over dominance. As trends come and go, larger cases, louder designs, the most enduring watches often feel almost reserved, confident enough not to shout. Which brings us to an unexpected realization. The history of luxury watches isn't a straight line of progress. It's a series of quiet adjustments, ideas borrowed, assumptions challenged, traditions softened rather than broken. And at the heart of it all is a simple truth. Luxury watches didn't become meaningful because they were worn by men or women. They became meaningful because they stayed close to the body, close to life. As we drift forward from this point, we'll begin to encounter materials shaped not by fashion or convenience, but by forces far older than any royal court or social custom. For now, let this early image linger gently. A watch worn not to impress, but simply to be felt. Materials have their own sense of time. Long before a watchmaker's hands ever touch a piece of metal, that material has already lived a life measured not in hours or years, but in geological ages, pressure, heat, and silence. This is where luxury watches quietly stretch beyond human history. At first glance, a watch case looks simple. Steel, gold, maybe platinum. Familiar words, comfortable categories. But in high watchmaking, these materials are rarely ordinary. They are selected not just for strength or beauty, but for how they behave when time presses against them, slowly, relentlessly. Take steel, for instance. Most objects around you are made from common stainless steel. Practical, affordable, predictable. But many luxury watches use alloys developed specifically for extreme resistance to corrosion and deformation. Steels that are more difficult to machine, harder on tools, and far less forgiving during finishing. Why choose the harder path? Because these alloys age differently. They hold their surfaces longer. They resist fatigue. They respond to polishing in subtler ways. Over decades, they maintain their character rather than surrendering to it. And in a world where a watch is meant to outlive its first owner, that matters. Gold, too, is rarely what it seems. Pure gold is too soft for daily wear. So watchmakers create proprietary blends, adding copper, silver, palladium, adjusting color, hardness, and even how light travels across the surface. Two gold cases may look identical under showroom lights, yet behave entirely differently after 10 years on a wrist. One will soften. Another will deepen. Another will barely change at all. And then there are the materials that feel almost mythic. Some dials are carved from stone formed millions of years ago. Others incorporate fragments of meteorites, iron-nickel alloys that cooled slowly in the vacuum of space long before Earth had oceans. When polished, These materials reveal crystalline patterns that no human hand designed and no machine can replicate. Each slice is unique, each pattern unrepeatable. Wearing such a watch means carrying a fragment of cosmic time, something that existed long before calendars, before language, before the idea of hours. And here's a sleepy fact that often goes unnoticed. These materials are not chosen for spectacle. They are chosen for quiet permanence. A meteorite dial doesn't sparkle loudly. Fossilized materials don't shout for attention. Their beauty reveals itself slowly, in subdued light, over repeated glances. They reward patience, the same way mechanical movements do. Even sapphire, the transparent crystal protecting most luxury dials, hides its own story. Synthetic sapphire is grown under intense heat and pressure, mimicking conditions found deep within the earth. It is harder than steel, resistant to scratches, and nearly indifferent to time. Yet shaping it is an act of precision bordering on meditation. Cutting, polishing, and fitting sapphire crystals requires careful restraint. Too much force, and the crystal fractures. Too little, and it refuses to cooperate. The process cannot be rushed. Time resists being enclosed. What's fascinating is how these ancient materials are paired with human-scale craftsmanship. Cosmic matter, geological remnants, and engineered alloys all converge at a workbench where a single person decides, by feel, whether something is finished. And often, finished doesn't mean flawless. Microscopic variations are accepted. Natural patterns are preserved. Signs of origin are respected. Luxury watchmaking understands something many industries have forgotten. Uniformity is not the same as quality. In fact, uniqueness often carries more meaning. When you look at a luxury watch made from rare materials, you are not just seeing a design choice. You are seeing a conversation between deep time and human time. Between processes that took millions of years and processes that take thousands of hours. Both slow. Both deliberate. Both indifferent to urgency. And perhaps that's why these watches feel grounding. They remind us that time didn't start when we did, and it won't end when we're gone. We are simply borrowing a moment, wearing it briefly, letting it rest against our pulse. As we move on, we'll shift from materials shaped by nature to ideas shaped by rivalry, quiet competitions fought not with noise or speed, but with complexity, patience, and restraint. But for now, let these materials rest in your mind. Stone, metal, crystal, all older than us, all willing to wait. Competition, in the world of luxury watches, rarely looks like competition. There are no countdowns, no finish lines, no public declarations of victory. Instead, rivalry unfolds quietly, over decades, inside workshops where time moves too slowly for impatience to survive. This is the kind of competition that doesn't care who arrives first. It only cares who arrives correctly. At the heart of this silent contest is complexity. Not complexity for the sake of confusion, but complexity as a form of discipline. Each additional function added to a mechanical watch introduces new problems, new sources of friction, new demands on energy, new ways for things to go subtly wrong. And watchmakers lean into that difficulty. They design mechanisms that perform multiple tasks simultaneously while sharing a single, limited source of power. A spring that must drive hours, minutes, seconds, calendars, chronographs, and sometimes even sound, without ever losing composure. Every complication is a negotiation. Take the tourbillon. Originally conceived to counter the effects of gravity on timekeeping, it rotates the escapement inside a delicate cage, constantly changing its orientation. The idea is elegant. The execution is merciless. The tolerances are extreme. The balance is fragile. The margin for error is almost non-existent. And yet, watchmakers pursue it not because it is practical, but because it represents control achieved through patience rather than force. Chronographs tell a similar story. To measure elapsed time, a chronograph must start, stop, and reset without disturbing the watch's underlying rhythm. That means clutches engaging smoothly, hammers striking precisely, hands returning exactly to zero every time. A single misalignment can cause hesitation, a stutter, a loss of trust. So the mechanisms are refined again, and again, and again. Years pass. Designs evolve. Rival workshops solve similar problems in entirely different ways. Not to outperform one another publicly, but to satisfy their own internal standards. This is what makes the competition so quiet. The audience is small. The applause is rare. The reward is internal. Watchmakers often spend their entire careers improving a single mechanism by imperceptible margins. Shaving friction here, redistributing weight there, changing the angle of a lever by a fraction of a degree. To outsiders, nothing seems to change. To insiders, everything does. And here's a sleepy truth hidden within that rivalry. Most people will never use these complications. They will never time a race, never consult a perpetual calendar, never rely on a mechanical alarm or chiming mechanism. Yet these features exist anyway. Not to be used, but to be possible. Luxury watchmaking treats potential as something worth preserving. The ability to do something, even if rarely called upon, has value in itself. It reflects a worldview where mastery matters more than efficiency, and knowledge is not discarded simply because it isn't frequently required. This mindset shapes entire institutions. Some workshops are known for ultra-thin movements, others for acoustic perfection, others for reliability under extreme conditions. Each pursues its own form of excellence, refining a narrow slice of the art until it becomes unmistakable. The competition, then, is not about domination. It's about identity. About saying, quietly, this is how we believe time should behave. And because these beliefs are deeply rooted, change happens slowly. New ideas are tested cautiously. Innovations are introduced gently. Nothing is rushed into permanence. Even failures are absorbed patiently. A mechanism that doesn't work as intended isn't discarded immediately. It's studied, adjusted, set aside. Sometimes revisited years later, when new understanding makes it viable. Time, in this world, is an ally. And perhaps that's why luxury watchmaking feels so far removed from modern urgency. While other industries chase disruption, watchmakers value continuity. While trends rise and fall, they focus on refinement. The result is a body of knowledge passed down quietly, hand to hand, generation to generation. Not through manuals, but through presence, through watching, through listening, through doing the same thing carefully, thousands of times. As we move forward, we'll leave the abstract realm of ideas and rivalry and step directly into the workshop, into the slow, meticulous process where these philosophies become physical reality. For now, let this thought settle. In the world of luxury watches, competition doesn't push time forward. It teaches time how to move more gracefully. If you were to stand inside a high watchmaking workshop long enough, something subtle would begin to happen. Your sense of urgency would dissolve. There are no clocks on the walls, not because time is ignored, but because it is already everywhere. In the steady posture of the watchmakers, in the unhurried pace of their hands, in the way each action seems to wait for the next, rather than rushing toward it. This is where a luxury watch truly begins to exist. Not as a product, but as a process. The journey starts quietly, often with sketches that look more like suggestions than plans. Lines are drawn lightly, erased, redrawn. Dimensions are proposed, questioned, softened. Nothing is fixed too early, because fixing something too soon can prevent it from becoming what it needs to be. From these drawings, prototypes emerge. Not full watches, just ideas made tangible. A gear train tested on its own. A balance assembly examined under magnification. A case profile shaped in metal, held, turned, felt. Feeling matters more than numbers here. Before anything is assembled, each component is considered individually. Hundreds of parts, sometimes more, each with a role that must harmonize with every other. They are machined first by precise tools, but that is only the beginning. Machines can create shapes. They cannot create readiness. That comes later. After machining, parts rest. Literally. They are set aside to stabilize, to release internal stresses introduced during cutting. This pause can last days, sometimes longer. Rushing this step can introduce distortions so small they are invisible, but destructive over time. Patience protects the future. Then comes finishing. This is where time truly slows. Edges are softened by hand. Surfaces are brushed, polished, refined. Not to perfection, but to intention. Each finish serves a purpose. Some reduce friction. Others prevent dust from clinging. Others exist purely to please the eye that may never see them again. A single bridge, the metal plate that holds several gears in place, can take hours to finish properly. Not because it's difficult, but because it requires restraint. Pressure must remain constant. Angles must remain clean. Any lapse in attention leaves a mark that cannot be erased. And so the watchmaker breathes slowly, moves slowly, thinks slowly. Assembly happens in stages, never all at once. Sub-assemblies are built, tested, disassembled, adjusted, and rebuilt. Gears are placed, removed, replaced. Springs are installed, released, recalibrated. Nothing is forced. If resistance appears, it is investigated, not overcome. This is another quiet truth of luxury watchmaking. Force is a sign of misunderstanding. When parts finally come together smoothly, it feels less like construction and more like alignment. The movement begins to function not because it has been completed, but because it has been allowed to work. The first time a newly assembled movement starts ticking is rarely dramatic. There is no celebration, just a pause, a listening moment. Is the sound even? Is the motion stable? Does anything hesitate? If something feels off, even slightly, the watch may be taken apart again. Not because it failed, but because it hasn't yet found its natural rhythm. This cycle can repeat many times. Weeks pass. Months pass. To the outside world, nothing seems to be happening. Inside the workshop, everything is happening, slowly, quietly, deliberately. And here's a sleepy fact that often surprises people. A luxury watch does not become more valuable because it takes a long time to make. It takes a long time to make because value demands time. Speed introduces shortcuts. Shortcuts introduce uncertainty. Uncertainty introduces regret. Watchmakers are trained to avoid regret. They learn to stop before stopping feels necessary, to rest before fatigue sets in, to leave something unfinished until the next day, when fresh eyes and steadier hands can see what was invisible before. In this way, watchmaking becomes less about production and more about rhythm. Work. Pause. Observe. Adjust. The watch grows, not forward, but inward. As we move deeper into this world, we'll begin to see how human hands perform tasks no machine can replicate, how individuality enters each piece through subtle, almost imperceptible variations. But for now, let this moment linger. A watch is not rushed into existence. It is invited. There comes a point in watchmaking where machines politely step aside. They have done their part. They have cut, shaped, and drilled with flawless consistency. They have produced parts that are correct, dimensionally perfect, repeatable, obedient. But correctness is not enough. This is where human hands return. In high watchmaking, certain tasks are left deliberately unfinished by machines. Not because technology failed, but because finishing requires judgment, and judgment lives in the body, not in code. A watchmaker's hands are trained to sense resistance through tools no thicker than a needle. To feel when metal is yielding too much, or not enough. To recognize, by touch alone, when a surface has reached its final state. This sensitivity cannot be rushed or automated. Hand engraving is one of the most intimate examples. Under magnification, an engraver guides a cutting tool across metal, removing material in microscopic curls. Each line is permanent. There is no undo. The pressure must remain consistent, the angle precise, the pace unbroken. Engraving is not drawn, it is carved in time. Two engravers following the same design will never produce identical results. One line might breathe a little deeper. Another might soften at the edge. These differences are not flaws. They are signatures. This is how individuality enters a watch. Dial finishing carries the same quiet intensity. Applying color to a dial, especially enamel or lacquer, requires layers built slowly, sometimes fired repeatedly at high temperatures. A fraction too much heat, and the color changes. A moment too long, and cracks appear. Watchmakers learn to read surfaces the way others read faces. They notice tension, fatigue, readiness. They stop not when a process is complete, but when the material asks them to. Polishing, too, is deceptively gentle. From the outside, it looks like nothing more than a soft wool brushing against metal. In reality, polishing determines how light will behave for decades. A single edge, polished too aggressively, loses its sharpness forever. One corner softened too much can never be restored. So watchmakers polish slowly. They protect edges while refining planes. They chase reflections, not brightness, but clarity. This attention extends to parts no one will ever see. The interior angles of bridges, the undersides of plates, the bevels hidden beneath other components. These areas receive the same care as visible surfaces. Not because customers will inspect them, but because the watchmaker will know they are there. And that knowledge matters. There is a phrase often shared quietly in workshops. If you can see it, you've already failed. True craftsmanship, in this world, happens just beyond visibility. In places that require disassembly, patience, and trust to appreciate. This philosophy shapes the rhythm of work. Watchmakers rarely complete an entire watch from start to finish. Instead, they specialize. One may spend years perfecting a single technique, engraving, polishing, regulating, contributing their expertise to watches they will never fully assemble. Their presence is invisible, but essential. And here's a sleepy truth that feels especially comforting. No two luxury watches are truly identical, even within the same model. They share dimensions, materials, architecture, but the human hand leaves traces that machines cannot erase. Subtle differences in texture, slight variations in reflection, a quiet warmth that no specification sheet can describe. These differences accumulate slowly over time. The watch becomes not just a product of a brand, but of many individuals, each adding something small and irreversible. In this way, a luxury watch becomes a collective memory of steady hands, of practiced patience, of choices made quietly and carefully. As we continue, we'll move deeper into the invisible, into finishes applied purely for beauty, hidden from the world, existing only to satisfy a tradition of excellence that refuses to be hurried. For now, let your attention rest on the idea of hands. Hands that shape time, one slow movement at a time. There are parts of a luxury watch that exist in permanent darkness. Once the case is closed, they will never be seen again, not by the owner, not by passers-by, not even by the watchmaker who assembled them. And yet, these hidden surfaces are often treated with the same care as the dial itself. Sometimes, even more. This is one of the most quietly astonishing aspects of high watchmaking. Beauty is created without an audience. Inside the movement, bridges are decorated with flowing stripes known as Geneva waves. Plates are dotted with tiny overlapping circles called perlage. Edges are beveled and polished to a mirror finish through a process known as anglage, done entirely by hand, using wooden pegs and abrasive pastes. These finishes serve no functional purpose. They do not improve accuracy. They do not extend power reserve. They do not make the watch more durable. They exist because tradition insists that excellence should not depend on visibility. This philosophy runs deep. Historically, watchmakers believed that a movement should be as beautiful as possible, whether or not anyone ever saw it, because beauty influenced care. A beautifully finished movement encouraged respect, gentleness, and longevity. A rough one invited neglect. So finishing became a moral act as much as an aesthetic one. Each stripe, dot, and bevel is applied slowly. One mistake means starting over. There are no shortcuts, because shortcuts leave marks, and marks disrupt harmony. The watchmaker learns to maintain even pressure, consistent rhythm, and calm focus over long periods. This work is meditative. Time passes without being noticed. What's remarkable is that many of these finishes require parts to be handled repeatedly, removed, polished, cleaned, inspected, and reinstalled. The process introduces countless opportunities for dust, fingerprints, or damage. Avoiding them requires discipline bordering on ritual. And still, the work continues. Why? Because in luxury watchmaking, quality is defined by what you would do even if no one were watching. This idea carries a certain quiet comfort. It suggests that not all effort needs recognition. That some things are worth doing simply because they are right. That care, once applied, carries its own meaning, whether or not it's ever acknowledged. Even more fascinating is how these hidden finishes influence the people who work on them. Watchmakers often say they can tell the character of a movement by its unseen details. A hurried finish reveals impatience. Uneven angles suggest distraction. Clean, consistent decoration reflects a calm and attentive mind. In this way, movements become reflections of their makers. Not just of their skill, but of their state of being. And here's a sleepy fact worth lingering on. Many luxury watches are finished more beautifully inside than outside. The dial may be restrained, the case understated. But within, the movement glows with patterns and polish that rival fine art, never meant to impress, only to exist. This inward focus shapes how watches age. Hidden surfaces remain pristine long after external ones show wear. The contrast becomes poetic. A scratched case sheltering a flawless interior. Time marking the outside, while the inside remains untouched, like memory preserved beneath experience. As we drift onward, we'll leave these invisible aesthetics behind and step into environments designed to test a watch's limits, where silence gives way briefly to stress, shock, and pressure. But for now, let this idea settle gently. Some of the most beautiful things in this world are never meant to be seen. They are meant to be known. Before a luxury watch is ever allowed to rest quietly on a wrist, it must first endure discomfort. Not loudly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Testing, in high watchmaking, is a kind of controlled adversity. It happens away from showrooms and photography. In rooms that feel more like laboratories than ateliers. Places where beauty is temporarily irrelevant and resilience takes center stage. Here, watches are asked difficult questions. What happens when you fall? When temperature shifts suddenly? When magnetism interferes? When water presses inward, slowly, insistently? Each question is asked patiently, repeatedly. Shock tests come first. The watch is subjected to sudden impacts, short, sharp forces meant to simulate accidental drops or abrupt movements. These forces travel through the case, into the movement, and finally into the delicate balance wheel. A well-made watch absorbs this energy gracefully. Springs flex. Jewels cushion. The system yields without breaking. If something shifts, even slightly, the watchmaker will know. Next comes water. Not just splashes or rain, but sustained pressure. Watches are sealed, submerged, and left to sit. sometimes for hours, sometimes longer. The goal is not to prove invincibility, but consistency. A seal that works today must work years from now, after countless crown turns and temperature changes. So it is tested again and again. Then there is magnetism. In modern life, magnetic fields are everywhere: phones, speakers, electronics hidden inside walls and furniture. Magnetism can disrupt a mechanical watch silently, pulling components just enough to distort timekeeping. To counter this, watches are exposed to controlled magnetic environments. Some movements resist effortlessly. Others require shielding or specialized alloys. The goal is not perfection, but predictability. Heat and cold follow. Watches are placed in environments warmer than skin, colder than winter air. Metals expand. Oils thicken or thin. Balanced springs react. A stable watch adapts without panic. It keeps breathing. And then there is time itself. After physical tests are complete, watches are left running. Days, weeks, sometimes longer. They are observed, measured, listened to. Subtle patterns emerge. Small gains or losses reveal deeper truths about harmony and balance. This period is not rushed. A watch that passes quickly may still fail later. Patience is the only way to be sure. Here's a sleepy fact that rarely reaches the surface. Many luxury watches are adjusted more than once, sometimes many times, after they already meet official standards. Because meeting a standard is not the same as satisfying a watchmaker. Adjustments are made based on how a watch behaves in multiple positions. Dial up, dial down, crown left, crown right. Each orientation changes gravity's influence. Each reveals a different side of the mechanism's personality. The watch is not forced into submission. It is coaxed into balance. And if balance cannot be achieved easily, the watch is disassembled and examined again. Something, somewhere, is not yet at peace. This testing phase can feel almost anticlimactic. There is no artistry here. No romance. Just repetition. Measurement. Observation. And yet, it is one of the most caring stages of all. Because testing is not about catching failure. It is about protecting the future. Every hour spent here is an hour the watch will not demand from its owner later. Fewer repairs. Fewer surprises. A quieter life. In this sense, testing is an act of kindness. The watch is allowed to struggle now, so it can rest later. As we move on, we'll leave these controlled environments and return to something even more delicate, the invisible substances that keep the entire system alive, quietly reducing friction, quietly preventing wear. But for now, let this idea linger gently. True reliability is not loud. It is earned patiently, in silence. There is a moment in every luxury watch's life when something almost invisible decides everything. It isn't a gear. It isn't a spring. It isn't even a jewel. It's oil. Not the kind you see. The kind you barely see. Lubrication in high watchmaking is one of the most misunderstood and most critical arts in the entire process. To the untrained eye, it seems trivial. A drop here, a touch there, something to reduce friction and move on. But in reality, lubrication is where precision becomes fragile. Mechanical watches operate on incredibly small tolerances. Surfaces slide against one another thousands of times per hour. Without lubrication, metal would grind metal, slowly erasing accuracy. With too much lubrication, parts would slip, attract dust, and lose control. The margin between too little and too much is microscopic. Watchmakers use specialized synthetic oils engineered to remain stable over years, resisting evaporation, thickening, and breakdown. Each oil has a purpose. One for high-speed components, another for slow-moving pivots, another for surfaces that experience intermittent contact. No single oil does everything. Applying these oils is not done with droppers or syringes, but with tools that look almost ceremonial. Fine-tipped needles, microscopic applicators, sometimes nothing more than a sharpened sliver of metal. The amount applied is so small that under magnification, it appears as a perfect, suspended bead, held in place by surface tension alone. Too much pressure, and the bead spreads. Too little, and it doesn't settle. The watchmaker watches the oil more than the part. This is where experience matters. Oil behaves differently depending on temperature, humidity, and surface finish. A surface polished too smoothly may repel it. A surface left too rough may trap it. The watchmaker must anticipate how that oil will behave not just now, but years from now. This foresight is what separates routine assembly from true craft. Here's a sleepy fact that often surprises even enthusiasts. Most luxury watches use several different oils in a single movement, sometimes more than a dozen. Each placed intentionally. Each chosen for longevity. Each expected to perform quietly, without attention, for years. And if lubrication is done incorrectly, the consequences are delayed. The watch will run. It will keep time. Everything will seem fine. Until one day, it won't. This delayed failure is what watchmakers fear most. Because it means the mistake was invisible at birth, only revealing itself after trust had already formed. That's why lubrication is treated with such reverence. Watchmakers often pause before oiling. They breathe. They steady their hands. They make sure nothing distracts them. Because this step cannot be corrected easily later. Once the watch is sealed, oil becomes destiny. And yet, lubrication is not permanent. Over time, oils age. They migrate. They dry. This is not a flaw, it is a reality. Mechanical watches are living systems, and like all living systems, they require care. This is why servicing exists. Not to fix something broken, but to refresh something tired. When a watch returns for service after years of use, one of the first things done is cleaning. Old oils are removed completely. Parts are inspected. Surfaces are restored. And then, slowly, the process begins again. Fresh oil. Fresh balance. Fresh breath. The watch is given another quiet beginning. There is something deeply calming about this cycle. Nothing is meant to last forever without attention. But with care, things can last far longer than expected. Decades. Generations. And it all comes back to a substance you can barely see, applied by someone who knows exactly when to stop. As we move onward, we'll listen, not with our eyes, but with our ears, to one of the most intimate aspects of a mechanical watch, its sound. For now, let this detail drift gently through your thoughts. A single invisible drop, quietly shaping years of time. If you listen closely enough, time has a sound. Not the sound we imagine, no dramatic ticking echoing through a quiet room, but something far softer, more intimate. A rhythm so consistent that, after a while, it fades into the background of awareness, like breathing. In luxury watchmaking, this sound matters more than most people realize. Inside a mechanical watch, the escapement releases energy in carefully measured intervals. Each release produces a tiny impulse, a controlled conversation between balance wheel, pallet fork, and escape wheel. Together, they create the heartbeat of the watch. Tick, tick, tick. But not all ticks are the same. Some are sharp. Some are dull. Some are uneven in ways the ear may not consciously register, but the mind feels. This is why experienced watchmakers listen to watches. Not casually, but intentionally. They hold the movement close. They adjust their focus. They listen not for loudness, but for balance, for symmetry, for calm. A healthy watch does not rush its sound. It does not hesitate. It does not stumble. Its rhythm feels settled. In some ateliers, this listening becomes so refined that specialists, sometimes trained in acoustics or music, are involved in fine-tuning. Especially in watches with chiming functions, where sound is not incidental, but central. Minute repeaters, for example, transform time into melody. Hours, quarters, and minutes are struck on tiny gongs inside the case, activated by a single slide. Designing these sounds is an art in itself. The tone must be clear but gentle, resonant but restrained, audible yet never aggressive. The case material, thickness, and internal volume all influence the result. Even the way the gongs are bent, by hand, changes the voice of the watch. This is why two watches with identical mechanisms can sound entirely different. Sound carries personality. But even in non-chiming watches, acoustics reveal hidden truths. An uneven tick can signal friction. A faint irregularity can hint at imbalance. A subtle change in cadence may suggest oil migrating where it shouldn't. These signals are often too soft for machines to flag immediately, but human ears, trained over years, notice them instinctively. Listening becomes diagnosis. And here's a sleepy fact that feels almost poetic. Watchmakers often know something is wrong before they can explain why. They feel it in the sound. This connection between hearing and craft runs deep. Many watchmakers describe the ticking of a well-regulated movement as calming, almost hypnotic. A reminder that something complex can behave simply, predictably, without drama. It's no coincidence that mechanical watches are often associated with quiet moments. Late evenings, empty rooms, low light. Their sound is not meant for crowds. It's meant for solitude. Over time, wearers begin to recognize this rhythm too. Some say they sleep better with a mechanical watch nearby. Others find comfort in winding their watch at the same time each night, listening to the gentle resistance of the crown, the faint click as the spring tightens. These rituals are not necessary, but they are grounding. In a world filled with alerts and alarms, a watch that simply keeps going, without asking anything, offers a rare kind of peace. And that peace has a sound. a steady, patient pulse. As we move forward, we'll leave the realm of sensation and step into secrecy, into the hidden marks, signatures, and details placed inside watches not for function, but for memory. For now, let the ticking soften. Let it blend with the quiet around you. Time is still moving, but it doesn't need your attention anymore. Somewhere deep inside certain luxury watches, there is a detail you were never meant to find. Not because it's hidden poorly, but because it's hidden deliberately. These are known, quietly, as secret signatures. They are not listed on specification sheets. They are not shown in advertisements. They are not pointed out during sales conversations. They exist in places only a watchmaker, or a patient owner during servicing, might ever see. A tiny engraving beneath a bridge. A microscopic symbol tucked under a balance cock. A hand-cut flourish on a surface that will disappear forever once the movement is assembled. These details serve no functional purpose. They do not improve accuracy. They do not strengthen the movement. They do not increase water resistance or power reserve. They exist purely as acts of authorship. In centuries past, watchmakers used secret signatures to protect themselves. Counterfeiting was common, and overt signatures could be copied. So craftsmen left discreet marks, lines, symbols, patterns, known only to those trained to recognize them. But over time, these signatures became something else. They became personal. A quiet way of saying, I was here. I cared. I left something of myself inside this object. What's remarkable is how little ego these marks contain. They are not meant to be discovered easily. They do not demand recognition. In many cases, the artisan who added them will never meet the person who owns the watch. And yet, the work is done anyway. This is where luxury watchmaking reveals one of its most human traits. Pride without performance. Care without expectation. Meaning without visibility. Some signatures are playful. A hidden initial. A tiny motif. Others are solemn, traditional flourishes passed down through generations. In some workshops, only certain masters are allowed to add them, and only after decades of experience. Permission is earned slowly, and once given, it is used sparingly. Here's a sleepy fact that often surprises even seasoned collectors. Some watches contain multiple secret signatures from different artisans, each contributing their own invisible mark. The engraver, the finisher, the assembler. A single watch may carry the quiet presence of many hands, layered invisibly beneath one another. And these marks remain even when the watch is serviced decades later. Parts are cleaned, walls replaced, adjustments made. But the signatures stay. They are not erased. Because erasing them would mean erasing history. In this way, luxury watches become archives. Not just of timekeeping technology, but of human presence. Evidence that someone, somewhere, took extra time to do something no one asked for. This philosophy runs counter to much of modern life. We are encouraged to be efficient, to be visible, to optimize effort based on reward. But secret signatures remind us of another way of working, one where meaning exists even without acknowledgement. One where the act itself is enough. And there is something deeply calming about that idea. That not everything meaningful needs to be seen. that some care can remain private. That value does not require applause. As we drift onward, we'll move from these hidden details into watches so complex they require a single, deliberate action to reveal their full character, mechanisms that transform time into sound, motion, and ceremony. But for now, let this thought rest gently. Inside some watches, someone is still quietly present. There are watches that ask for attention only once. One deliberate movement, one gentle slide, one quiet decision to listen. These are the watches that contain what watchmakers call grand complications, mechanisms so intricate that they exist almost at the edge of what mechanical systems can reasonably do. They are not designed for frequent use. They are designed for understanding. A minute repeater, for example, transforms time into sound. When activated, it strikes the hours, quarters, and minutes using tiny hammers and gongs hidden inside the case. The sequence unfolds slowly, deliberately, like a whispered explanation. Listen too closely, and you might miss it. Listen too casually, and it loses its magic. Everything about this mechanism resists haste. The gongs must be shaped by hand, bent and tuned like musical instruments. The case itself becomes part of the sound chamber. Its material, gold, platinum, steel, changes the voice of the watch entirely. Even the thickness of the case walls alters resonance. And because these watches are activated by a single action, everything must work perfectly the first time. There is no warm-up, no margin for error, no second chance. Other grand complications track astronomical cycles. Perpetual calendars account for leap years, irregular month lengths, and century rules that most people never think about. Some will display the correct date for decades, if kept running, without intervention. But here's the sleepy truth. Most owners will never need this accuracy. The watch does not insist on being useful. It simply insists on being capable. Developing these mechanisms can take years. Entire teams may work on a single complication, refining it through countless iterations. Prototypes are built, tested, disassembled, redesigned. Some ideas are abandoned after consuming vast amounts of time because they do not meet internal standards. And when a final version is approved, it is often produced in extremely small numbers. Sometimes only a handful are ever made. Not to create scarcity, but because making more would require compromise. This is why these watches can cost as much as homes, cars, or lifelong savings. You are not paying for materials alone. You are paying for time that cannot be recovered. Time spent learning what does not work. Time spent waiting for understanding to arrive. Time spent perfecting something most people will never fully use. And perhaps that is what makes these watches feel so ceremonial. They are not meant to be worn casually. They are meant to be approached, considered, activated with intention. A single action reveals years of effort. Then silence returns. As we move on, we'll step away from complexity and toward aging, toward how time itself leaves marks not as damage, but as beauty. But for now, let this image settle. One quiet motion, unfolding an entire world. Time does not always take things away. Sometimes it gives. In the world of luxury watches, this gift is known as patina, the slow, natural transformation of materials as they age, soften, and respond to the lives lived around them. Unlike wear or damage, patina is not something to be corrected. It is something to be noticed. Metal warms in tone. Luminous paint fades gently. Dials shift in color, cream deepening into ivory, black softening into charcoal, blue drifting toward gray. These changes happen quietly, over years. No single moment marks their arrival. One day, you simply realize the watch no longer looks the way it once did. And somehow, it looks better. This is one of the most counterintuitive sleepy facts in watch collecting. A luxury watch can become more valuable by aging. Not despite time, but because of it. Patina tells a story no manufacturer can replicate. It reflects exposure to sunlight, air, moisture, and human habit. Two identical watches, worn differently, will age differently. One may darken, another may spot, another may fade unevenly. Collectors learn to read these changes the way others read handwriting. They see honesty, consistency, life. This is why attempts to artificially recreate patina often feel hollow. Chemical treatments can mimic color, but they cannot reproduce time. They cannot replicate decades of subtle interaction between material and environment. Real patina is unrepeatable, and this imperfection is what gives it power. Scratches, too, are reconsidered in this light. A hairline mark on a case is no longer a flaw, it's a record. A memory etched in steel or gold. Proof that the watch was worn, not stored. In this way, luxury watches resist the idea of preservation as stagnation. They are meant to change, to respond, to soften, to carry traces of the lives they accompany. This philosophy runs deep in traditional watchmaking. Some finishes are chosen specifically because they age gracefully. Certain alloys are selected not for resistance to change, but for how beautifully they evolve. The goal is not eternal youth. It is graceful endurance. And perhaps that's why vintage watches hold such emotional weight. They are not frozen in time. They are shaped by it. Their patina reflects not just age, but survival. They remind us that time does not always erase meaning. Sometimes, it reveals it. As we approach the final stretch of tonight's journey, we'll step back and look at the whole picture, how history, craft, patience, and imperfection come together inside a single object meant to be worn quietly, day after day. For now, let this idea rest gently. Time leaves marks. And sometimes, those marks are the most beautiful part. By now, the workshop has grown quiet again. The lamp still glows. The bench is still there. And the watch, once scattered across hundreds of pieces, rests complete, sealed, and softly breathing. Nothing about it announces what it contains. And that feels right. Luxury watches were never meant to demand attention. They were meant to earn it, slowly, over time, through patience, restraint, and presence. Each section of this journey has pointed to the same quiet truth from a different angle. History showed us that watches began as intimate objects, worn close to the body before they ever became symbols of status. Materials reminded us that time existed long before humans learned to measure it. Craftsmanship revealed that slowness is not inefficiency, but care. Hidden details taught us that meaning does not require visibility. Sound, oil, testing, aging, all whispered the same lesson. that time is not something to be conquered. It is something to be lived alongside. A luxury watch is a paradox you can wear. It is precise, yet imperfect. Durable, yet delicate. Mechanical, yet emotional. It keeps moving forward, even as it invites you to pause. Perhaps that is why these objects endure across centuries while so many technologies fade within years. They do not promise speed. They do not offer optimization. They simply offer continuity, a steady rhythm in a restless world. Understanding these sleepy facts doesn't make a watch more accurate. It doesn't make it more expensive. But it does something quieter, and perhaps more important. It changes how you see time itself. You begin to notice pauses. You feel less urgency in the passing minutes. You start to recognize that not every moment needs to be filled. And in that recognition, something softens. The watch becomes less about hours and more about presence. Less about measurement and more about memory. A companion rather than a tool. So if, after tonight, you find yourself glancing at a watch, your own or someone else's, and feeling a moment of calm instead of hurry, then this quiet exploration has done its work. Now, let everything slow just a little more. Imagine the watch resting on a bedside table. The room is dim. The day has finished unfolding. There is nothing left to check, nothing left to count. The ticking, if you can hear it at all, blends gently with the quiet around you. Each second passes without effort. No one asks it to hurry. No one demands it be useful. Time simply moves, because it does. Your breathing begins to follow that rhythm, steady, unforced. Thoughts loosen their grip. Details blur softly at the edges, the way light does when your eyes grow tired. Somewhere far away, another watch is ticking too. Another room. Another night. Another person letting go of the day in their own quiet way. All these moments overlap, gently, without ever touching. And that's enough. There is nothing you need to remember. Nothing you need to plan. Nothing you need to hold on to. Just the soft awareness that time is passing, and you are allowed to rest within it. Let the images fade. Let the sounds soften. Let the idea of seconds dissolve into something slower, wider, calmer. Wherever you are tonight, allow yourself to drift. Time will keep moving. You don't have to.